Greetings. Glory to God on the highest, and on earth, peace to people of good will. So I wanted to make a quick video which discusses this Facebook post, which you see on your screen, or more specifically, a video which discusses the book that Facebook post is referencing, as it's a book that's come up in discussions on social media before, and I suspect it'll likely come up again. And for that reason, it seemed worthwhile to make a quick video on the topic. So jumping right in, this Facebook post's caption reads as follows, quote, Lenora E. Berson. Her book is called The Negro and The Jews. Her book admits that Negroes' claim to be Jews is legitimate. Why is this book so expensive? End quote. And then she shares a screenshot of this book, and her image captures that at the time the screenshot was taken, this particular used copy was being sold for over $400. Now, this Facebook post went up last Saturday, June 8th. And it's been shared hundreds of times since then. I dare to say that in a sense it sort of went viral. And worthy of note, the price of the book has apparently gone up considerably, with a used copy now being sold for nearly $3,000. And if you look at the comments on the post or the post resharing it, a number of people are arguing that the book is so expensive because the price increase is part of an effort to hide the truth therein. That they're making this book so expensive to hide the book from you and the amazing evidence, to hide the amazing evidence that's in that book. Now, regarding that claim that the book, quote unquote, admits that the relevant morphologically defined community's claim to being Jews is legitimate, that's almost an exact quote from the book. As on page 212, there's a line which reads, quote, the Negro's claim to be Jewish is legitimate, end quote. Now, admittedly, the definite article does not appear in that quote, but whatever the case, for those who don't know, an approach that's popular these days is for people to do keyword searches on Google Books so as to mine Google Books for any source which might seem to corroborate an already held position. And sometimes the people who do that wind up finding statements that are interesting, but are in books which Google only provides a snippet view for, which means that the person is unable to read much of the surrounding context. They only get that small snippet. So the person who made that Facebook post knows that the book has that line, which she found tantalizing, and she's noted that the book is rather expensive. And with that, let's first look at the context of the statement, and then let's discuss the ever-increasing price of the book. So first, to get into the context of the relevant statement, let's take a look at the book. So here's the book in hard copy, Lenora Berson's The Negroes and The Jews, which was published by Random House. And you don't have to buy a copy for hundreds or even thousands of dollars. Rather, you can just visit a local library, especially if you live in New York City. Now, this is a first edition, and it was published in 1971. And with that, I'd now like to turn to the table of contents. The relevant statement is in Chapter 11, a chapter which is titled White Hipsters and Black Jews. So with that, I'd now like to turn to that chapter, which begins on page 194. And here it is. Now, the relevant quote appears on page 212, but to understand the context, I think one should start reading from page 210, which begins a portion on Abel Respis, the leader of a congregation called the Adat Beit Moshe. And that section runs across 4 pages. So I'll hold this here for a moment for anyone who wants to pause the video and read the text that appears on pages 210 and 211. You might need to look at it on a desktop or a laptop. And I'll also share links to posts on Facebook and Twitter, which give one a clearer look at the relevant pages. But in the midst of this discussion about Abel Respis, who's an interesting figure who was arguably once the leader of an Israelite group that transitioned to a more rabbinic or mainstream Jewish position, and in the midst of that discussion about Abel Respis, there's a quote attributed to Respis. It's attributed to him. And you see at the bottom of page 211, one can find the start of that quote. In that bottom line of that page, the statement begins, quote, Judaism offers the Negro self-respect. And then the text stops there as it continues on to the next page. And as I turn on to the next page, 212, remember that the last word on the previous page was the, which I'll include as we pick up the text at the top of the next page. And so here's that quote that the person apparently found while mining Google Books. So picking up where we left off, quote, the Negro's claim to be Jewish is legitimate. The land of Israel is located in Western Asia and borders on North Africa. All of the native inhabitants of that region were non-white. When Spain expelled its Jews in 1492, many of them went to to Africa. It seems probable that some of them were brought later to America as slaves. The spirituals never sing of African rivers. It's always the Jordan or the Red Sea. They don't sing about African chiefs or kings. It's David or Moses or some other characters from the Bible, end quote. And that's it. I'll pull back the camera view a bit so one can see the fuller context and as well as the end of the chapter. But the salient point here is that the relevant Facebook post seems to have oversold the fact of the matter when it said that this book, quote unquote, admits that this is the case, seemingly giving the impression that this was the author's position. However, when looking at the actual statement in context, one can see that the author was merely quoting someone else, namely a gentleman who might be described as the leader of an Israelite group or perhaps an erstwhile Israelite group. Suffice to say, there wasn't some thunderous piece of evidence that needed to be hidden, so those sorts of speculations and conspiracy theories don't actually explain the high prices that the certain used copies of the book are going for right now. But that then brings us to the question of why a used copy of the book would be put up for sale for so much money. Well, with that in mind, perhaps some insight can be found in the fact that the book was being sold for roughly $450 when that Facebook post first went up last Saturday. And in the course of the few days since then, in the course of the few days of the post going viral, the price has now risen to nearly $3,000. I would argue that that's a sign that people are raising the prices on used copies precisely because the poorly thought out speculations and conspiracy theories of emotionally manipulated Israelites are driving up demand. And we saw a similar issue with Vladimir Ivanov's book, Russian Icons. There were people who were bragging online about having spent hundreds and sometimes even thousands of dollars for that book. And that willingness to part with one's cash like that is going to drive up prices. So, too, some might remember that around this time 5 years ago, Mawuli Mauvi's book, The Call to the Hebrews, was being sold for nearly $900. And that raises this question: why was that book so expensive? And the answer is precisely because the person setting that price believed that there were folks willing to pay that much for the book. And at this point, honestly, I have to wonder if some of the folks who are drastically inflating the prices of their used copies might themselves be folks who work within the Israelite spectrum. I think we all know that there are certainly people who work the Israelite spectrum like a field from which profit can be harvested. There are folks who see financial opportunities and try to manipulate people accordingly, whether to sell merchandise or entice people to pay for class lessons or to solicit donations or just to have a video that goes viral and thus get money from the views. And so with all that in mind, what I was saying is that I wouldn't be surprised if this phenomenon with the expensive used books falls among those trends. There might be folks who are acquiring used copies of a book that can be spun as having some significant truth and then reselling that book at a ridiculously inflated price and then citing the absurd price as evidence that the book is a must-have item, which sinister forces are trying to hide from you. But even if that isn't the case, which is to say, even if there aren't folks playing that precise game in that precise way, as I noted before, the sorts of speculations and conspiracy theories that float around Israelite circles can drive prices up. For example, my father used to be into the antiquarian book scene, and he subscribed to a periodical which reported on books that sold for hefty sums. This book sold for several $100s, this book sold for several $1,000s, etc. And I mentioned that to point out that the fact that there are folks reporting and documenting significant sales, that alone can drive up prices. If a bookseller catches wind that people are willing to pay hundreds or even thousands of dollars for an item, they're likely to raise the price on that item to meet that willingness. The contents of the book are irrelevant at that point, right? I mean, honestly, if someone was willing to pay thousands of dollars for a book with all blank pages, someone else would be willing to sell them just such a book for that price, So it really doesn't matter what's in the book. What matters is how much money people are willing to pay for it. But with that, I'll close this video here. To sum up what was covered here, the relevant book, which again is Lenora Berson's The Negroes and The Jews, was not making any claim about Israelite heritage for the West African diaspora in the Americas, much less offering some significant evidence in that regard. The book was merely quoting someone else who was making a claim along those lines. Therefore, there's nothing in the book that necessitates that it be hidden from the masses, right? Moreover, the book is not actually hidden from the masses. Rather, it's freely available at various libraries around the country, and including multiple libraries in New York City. Moreover, still, While used copies are now sold for obscenely high prices, those prices still aren't high enough to keep the book out of the hands of precisely the sorts of people who've been emotionally manipulated into thinking it's a special gem, right? On the contrary, while the relevant prices are high, they're still affordable to certain folks who are willing to shell out that much money. One might say the high prices reflect the upper threshold of what some are willing to pay after being influenced by unjustified speculations and online conspiracy theories into thinking it's worth that price. Food for thought. But like I said, I want to close this video here. As always, I welcome any comments, questions, or criticisms. So feel free to share your thoughts, whether positive or negative. And God bless.